Today, humanity is living in one of the healthiest periods in history. In wealthy countries, diseases like malaria have almost disappeared. Infant mortality has fallen dramatically, and medical science has advanced beyond what previous generations could have imagined. People now live longer lives, eat better food, drink cleaner water, and receive better health care. Yet despite all this progress, one deeply uncomfortable truth still remains: your place in society. Your status strongly affects your health, your happiness, your stress levels, and even the length of your life. This is the central idea behind status syndrome. The book argues that health is not shaped only by money, medicines, hospitals, or personal habits. Even after people have enough food, shelter, and safety, another invisible force begins to matter more than almost anything else: social hierarchy. Where people stand compared to others, how much respect they receive, how much control they have over their lives, and how connected they feel to society all shape human health in powerful ways. The book was written by Marmot, whose decades of research on health inequality became the foundation of the arguments presented throughout status syndrome. His work repeatedly demonstrates that inequality creates a social gradient across the entire population, not merely a divide between the rich and the poor. At every step upward in education, income, status, autonomy, and social participation, average health tends to improve. Likewise, every step downward increases exposure to psychosocial stress, the chronic emotional strain caused by insecurity, humiliation, lack of control, social exclusion, and status anxiety. Imagine someone who is not poor. They have a job, a home, clean drinking water, and enough food for their family. Their children do not sleep hungry. Yet there are still people above them in society. People with more money, more influence, larger homes, better education, and greater respect. Research shows something extraordinary. Every step upward on this social ladder improves health. This is not simply about extreme poverty. It is about relative position. The higher people stand in society, the healthier they tend to be, while those lower down experience greater risks of disease, stress, depression, and early death. The author calls this phenomenon status syndrome. At first glance, this idea feels strange. Why would a person with a 5-room house live longer than someone with a 4-room house? Why would an office manager live longer than a clerk? Why would more education increase life expectancy? The answer lies in two powerful forces: control over life and participation in society. Human beings need more than survival. Once basic needs are met, people also need autonomy, dignity, security, and meaningful social connection. When people lose control over their lives or feel excluded from society, stress begins damaging both mind and body. The author spent more than 25 years researching this connection. Modern societies often talk about healthcare in terms of technology and medicine, but the book argues that the deeper issue lies in how people live and work. A striking example comes from Washington, D.C. If someone rides the metro train from wealthy neighborhoods toward poorer ones, life expectancy gradually falls. Between the richest and poorest areas, the difference can reach almost 20 years. This pattern is not limited to America. The same thing appears in United Kingdom, Russia, Japan, and many other countries. People originally believed that this was simply a problem of rich versus poor. But research showed something more profound. Social hierarchy itself affects health. The book repeatedly emphasizes that this issue concerns everyone, not just the extremely poor. Wherever people stand on the ladder, those above them usually experience better health, while those below them experience worse health. For many years, diseases like heart disease and stress-related illness were considered diseases of success. People assumed that executives and wealthy professionals suffered more because of responsibility and pressure. Research proved the opposite. Lower status often creates greater stress. The lower someone stands in society, the greater their risk of heart disease, depression, stroke, kidney disease, lung disease, and even suicide. Why? Because the human brain constantly reacts to social position. When people feel ignored, powerless, humiliated, insecure, or trapped, the body responds biologically. Stress hormones rise. blood pressure increases. The immune system weakens. Fat accumulates around the abdomen. Over time, the body slowly breaks down. Most ordinary people intuitively understand that life problems can make people sick. But for a long time, scientists and policymakers ignored these social causes. The author's goal is to change that way of thinking. The book argues that society itself must be organized differently if people are to become healthier. Some people blame unhealthy individuals for smoking, eating poorly, or drinking too much alcohol. Others argue that healthcare access is the problem. But the book says these explanations are incomplete. The deeper issue is helplessness. When people feel they have no control over their lives, unhealthy behaviors often become coping mechanisms. The author originally began as a medical doctor interested in the biology of the human body. But after working with real patients, he realized disease was connected to social conditions. In psychiatric hospitals, many patients returned to terrible home environments after treatment. Heart and lung patients repeatedly came back to hospitals because nothing in their lives had changed. Eventually, the author understood that society itself helps determine who becomes sick. Amartya Sen strongly influenced this thinking. Sen argued that the true success of a society should not be measured only by wealth or economic growth, but by whether people are healthy, capable, and free. Development means freedom. It means giving people the ability to live meaningful lives and make choices for themselves. The book tells the story of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who noticed rising death rates in the Soviet Union during the 1970s. He predicted that the Soviet system would eventually collapse because people lacked control over their lives and meaningful social participation. People laughed at him. But years later, the dissolution of the Soviet Union did happen. The book argues that societies that deny autonomy and dignity eventually damage both health and stability. The author repeatedly clarifies that the argument is not about isolated exceptions. Some rich people die young. Some unhealthy people live long lives. But on average, patterns become clear. Average life expectancy in wealthy countries now reaches 70 to 80 years. Yet even inside those same countries, lower status groups die much earlier. In many poorer regions of the world, average lifespan remains drastically lower. The book insists that human beings are failing to reach their full potential because status inequality continues damaging society. Money matters, but only up to a point. After basic needs are fulfilled, relative status becomes more important than absolute wealth. How people compare themselves to others deeply affects their psychological state. This creates stress. America often describes itself as a land of equality, yet sharp class distinctions remain everywhere. The book references the opera La Bohème. Two poor characters, Rodolfo and Mimi, live in poverty. Rodolfo is an educated poet who voluntarily accepts poverty while pursuing artistic freedom. Mimi is a powerless worker with little control over her life. Mimi dies from tuberculosis. Rodolfo survives. The point is not simply that poverty kills. Rather, powerlessness, insecurity, and lack of autonomy damage health more deeply. Health cannot be separated from social experience. Most people think health depends only on diet and exercise. The book argues otherwise. Respect, dignity, social relationships, and status shape disease patterns across entire societies. The author asks readers to imagine a parade where people stand according to education level. Those with the least education stand at the front. As the parade continues, each additional level of education corresponds to slightly better health and longer life. This pattern is called the social gradient. Health improves step by step all the way upward. The same thing happens with income. One American study found that the poorest households faced mortality risks 4 times higher than the richest households. Even people just one step below the wealthiest group face significantly higher risk. Again, this shows that inequality itself matters. The book also discusses Captain Scott's South Pole expedition. One of the strongest men in the team, Evans, died first. Why? The argument is that Evans had little control and existed mainly to follow orders. Under extreme stress, his psychological resilience collapsed. The author also discusses Academy Awards winners. Actors who win Academy Awards live several years longer than equally wealthy actors who never win. Money alone cannot explain this. The key difference may be status, recognition, pride, and self-esteem. Interestingly, this effect does not appear among scriptwriters, suggesting that social prestige itself influences health. The book explains that nearly every major disease follows social hierarchy. Heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, lung disease, depression, and suicide all become more common lower down the social ladder. One of the most important discoveries came from the Whitehall studies of British civil servants. At the time, most people assumed high-ranking officials suffered the most stress. The studies proved otherwise. Lower-ranking employees faced much higher risks of illness and death. Researchers examined smoking, cholesterol, blood pressure, diet, and exercise. These factors explained only part of the difference. Even when everyone received the same healthcare access, the health gap remained. The real issue was social environment, control, autonomy, respect, and security. The author also challenges genetic explanations. Some people claim wealthy or successful individuals are simply born superior. The book strongly rejects this simplistic view. Genes matter, but environment matters enormously too. Height becomes one example. Higher status people tend to be taller. This is not because promotions increase height. Rather, childhood nutrition, stress levels, and living conditions affect physical development. The author describes his own family history. Older siblings raised during harder economic times were shorter. Younger siblings born after financial improvement became taller. This pattern appears across entire nations. Human genes did not radically change within a century, yet average height increased dramatically because living conditions improved. The same applies to intelligence. IQ scores have risen significantly across generations. Environment, nutrition, education, stimulation, and opportunity all shape human development. Some people argue that healthy individuals naturally rise higher in society while unhealthy individuals remain lower. Research shows this explanation plays only a minor role. Current social conditions themselves strongly shape health. If a poor child rises to higher social status, their health usually improves. The philosopher Adam Smith once argued that necessities are not merely items required for survival. Necessities are also the things needed to maintain dignity within society. In one era, lacking a shirt in public caused shame. In another era, lacking shoes became humiliating. Modern societies create new standards for acceptable participation. This leads to the idea of relative poverty. People may possess food and shelter, yet still feel excluded because they cannot participate fully in normal social life. The book tells the story of a woman named Patty. She has a job, food, water, and a home. But she cannot afford safe recreation for her children. She feels isolated. She cannot provide the same opportunities other families provide. To manage stress, she smokes cigarettes. Healthcare professionals tell her to stop smoking. But the deeper problem is not nicotine. The deeper problem is helplessness. Amartya Sen's capabilities approach becomes central here. Poverty does not simply mean low income. True poverty means lacking the capability to live a meaningful life. Money is only a tool. The real goal is freedom. Freedom to participate, freedom to choose, and freedom to live with dignity. European studies asked people what poverty means. People rarely mention starvation. Instead, they mentioned inability to repair household items, inability to host guests, inability to buy proper clothes for job interviews, inability to take vacations, or inability to provide normal experiences for children. This is relative poverty. Feeling inferior compared to others creates stress and shame. The book also explores status anxiety. People constantly compare themselves with others. In one experiment, participants preferred earning less money overall if it meant earning more than their neighbors. Humans often care more about relative superiority than absolute wealth. This competition creates anxiety and aggression. In violent neighborhoods, young men may kill each other over respect. Humiliation becomes psychologically unbearable. The author then turns toward biology. What exactly is stress? Stress is not merely imagination. It produces measurable physical effects. The book explains the fight or flight response. When a zebra sees a lion, the body redirects energy towards survival. Heart rate rises. Blood pressure increases. Digestion slows. hormones flood the bloodstream. This response is useful during short emergencies, but humans experience similar reactions during social threats. Public speaking, job insecurity, humiliation, fear of failure, and financial instability all can trigger chronic stress. The brain releases cortisol and other stress hormones. Temporary stress can sharpen performance. Chronic stress slowly destroys health. Chronic exposure to cortisol and other stress hormones does not simply affect emotions. It gradually weakens the immune system, increases inflammation, damages blood vessels, disrupts metabolism, and reduces the body's ability to recover from illness. Over many years, this psychosocial stress contributes to heart disease, diabetes, depression, obesity, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, and other chronic conditions. In this way, emotional and social suffering gradually become physical suffering. Research on baboons became especially important. Lower-ranking baboons suffered worse cardiovascular health, even though they did not smoke, eat junk food, or ignore doctors. Social hierarchy alone produced biological damage. The same pattern appeared among human workers. People lower in workplace hierarchies showed higher blood pressure and worse metabolic health. The book argues that improving society itself is necessary. Medicine alone cannot solve the problem. Work occupies a huge part of human life. Jobs provide not only income, but identity and status. People often assume stressful jobs are always the most harmful. But again, control matters more than workload. The author contrasts two workers. Nigel, a senior official, manages thousands of employees and faces enormous responsibility. Yet he enjoys his work because he has authority and decision-making power. Marjorie, a lower-level typist, performs repetitive tasks with little freedom. She feels emotionally crushed. Research consistently shows that low-control jobs create higher risks of heart disease and depression. Japanese companies are presented as a contrasting model. Japanese workplaces often involve stronger cooperation, worker participation, shared identity, and respect between managers and workers. Employees feel more valued. As a result, health outcomes improve. Home life matters too. Women who feel powerless, both at work and at home, face higher risks of depression and heart disease. Job loss becomes another major source of stress. Even anticipating unemployment can damage health. The book explains that unemployment harms people not only financially, but psychologically. People lose identity, structure, dignity, and social status. The author also discusses effort-reward imbalance. People become unhealthy when they work extremely hard but receive insufficient reward, respect, security, or recognition. Human beings expect fairness. When effort and reward feel disconnected, stress intensifies. Loneliness becomes another major theme. The book tells the story of a fictional wealthy young man isolated on an island. Despite wealth, isolation destroys him psychologically. Social connection is biologically protective. The immune system weakens when people become isolated. The book introduces another important idea about gender differences in stress. Men often respond to danger through fight or flight. Women more often respond through tend and befriend. Historically, mothers protected children and sought support from other women during danger. This social bonding releases oxytocin, a hormone associated with calmness, trust, and connection. Human society itself evolved through cooperation. Unlike other animals, humans use language and social relationships to maintain bonds. The book emphasizes that diseases require both an external cause and internal vulnerability. Tuberculosis bacteria existed long before antibiotics, yet death rates declined dramatically even before modern medicine because living conditions improved. Social environments strengthened human resistance. The same logic applies to modern disease. Smoking and poor diet matter, but they often arise from deeper social stress. The author explains that doctors traditionally separate diseases by body parts: heart disease, kidney disease, lung disease. But prevention requires understanding common roots. Stress, helplessness, isolation, and inequality can contribute to many different illnesses simultaneously. The book references researcher Hans Selye, who showed that chronic stress weakens the body generally, increasing vulnerability to multiple diseases. Marriage and strong relationships improve health. Studies show married individuals generally live longer than isolated individuals. Social support protects people emotionally and biologically. Research by psychologist Sheldon Cohen exposed people to cold viruses. Individuals with strong social relationships were far less likely to become sick. Loneliness weakens immune resistance. Communities with high trust also experience better health. Places where people trust neighbors, cooperate, and feel connected tend to have lower crime, less violence, and better well-being. Sociologist Emil Durkheim showed long ago that suicide rates rise when social bonds weaken. The book points out that during World War II, despite danger and hardship, some populations actually experienced health improvements because people united and supported one another. Japan becomes one of the strongest examples in the book. Despite spending less on healthcare than America, and despite high smoking rates, Japanese people live longer. Why? The book argues that Japan's stronger social cohesion, lower inequality, lifelong employment structures, collective responsibility, and community orientation protect health. Americans spend far more on medicine but experience lower life expectancy. Crime rates and imprisonment are also dramatically lower in Japan. Japanese executives publicly apologize when they fail because collective responsibility matters deeply. When Japanese people move to America and become socially isolated, their heart disease risk rises. The difference is not genetic, it is social. The book also highlights Kerala in India. Despite relatively low income, Kerala achieved impressive health outcomes. Strong education, literacy, cooperation, and social awareness improved life expectancy and reduced infant mortality. Workers in Kerala's beedi factories even shared newspaper readings together during work, creating social connection and mental stimulation. The author emphasizes that material possessions influence self-esteem. Cars, televisions, and appliances are not only objects. They symbolize belonging and dignity. People feel safer and more confident when they believe society includes them. Childhood experiences receive enormous attention in the book. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, showed how early relationships shape emotional resilience. Children raised with love, safety, and support develop healthier stress responses. Neglect, fear, instability, and emotional deprivation leave lifelong scars. Research on adopted children demonstrates how dramatically environments can transform outcomes. Children moved from deprived backgrounds into nurturing homes often show major improvements in IQ, emotional stability, and future success. Animal studies reinforce these findings. Young monkeys raised by nurturing mothers become more confident and socially successful. Even naturally fearful animals can become resilient under supportive conditions. The book explains 3 ways childhood shapes adult health. 1. Early experiences leave lasting biological effects. 2. Advantages and disadvantages accumulate throughout life. 3. Childhood influences future opportunities and social position. Research by David Barker discovered links between low birth weight and adult diseases such as diabetes and heart disease decades later. Poor conditions during pregnancy can shape long-term health. However, childhood alone does not determine destiny. Adult circumstances also matter. People who experience hardship, both in childhood and adulthood, face the greatest risks. The book rejects simplistic blame towards single mothers or divorced families. The real issue is not family structure alone, but poverty, insecurity, stress, and lack of support. One additional idea repeatedly implied throughout the book is the concept of the social determinants of health. The book argues that health is not created only inside hospitals or through medicines. Health is deeply shaped by social conditions. Education, income, work environments, childhood experiences, housing, social support, safety, dignity, and inequality. These social conditions influence stress levels, opportunities, behaviors, and even biological processes inside the human body. In this sense, society itself becomes a powerful force shaping disease and longevity. The author also emphasizes that healthcare systems alone cannot solve health inequality. Even the best hospitals and medical technologies can only treat illnesses after they appear. If people continue living under chronic stress, insecurity, humiliation, isolation, and lack of control, disease will continue to emerge. Prevention, therefore, requires changing social conditions themselves, not merely expanding medical treatment. A truly healthy society must reduce inequality, strengthen communities, improve working conditions, and provide people with greater dignity and autonomy. Another important point the book suggests is that inequality harms entire societies, not only the poor. Highly unequal societies often experience greater violence, weaker trust, higher crime, more anxiety, and lower social cohesion. Even wealthy individuals living in deeply unequal environments may experience greater insecurity and social tension. By contrast, societies with stronger trust, cooperation, fairness, and social inclusion tend to produce better overall well-being for everyone. The book ultimately argues that reducing inequality is not simply charity toward disadvantaged groups. It improves the health, stability, and humanity of society as a whole. The final sections of the book focus on morality and social responsibility. Why should society care about inequality? The author gives 3 reasons. First, efficiency. A society cannot reach its full potential while large portions of its population remain unhealthy. Second, practicality. People struggling with insecurity and stress find it harder to adopt healthy behaviors. Third, morality. It is fundamentally unjust for people to die younger simply because they occupy lower positions in social hierarchies. A civilized society should not allow helplessness to become a death sentence. The book argues that simply giving everyone equal opportunity is not enough. People starting from disadvantaged conditions require greater support. The author identifies 4 major areas for reform. Children. Every child deserves education, emotional security, nutrition, and opportunity. Work. Employees should receive dignity, participation, autonomy, and fair reward. Communities. Neighborhoods should create safety, trust, and social connection. Older people. Elderly individuals should remain socially included rather than isolated. Ultimately, Status Syndrome is not merely a book about medicine. It is a book about society itself. It argues that biology and social life are deeply connected. Human beings are not machines. They require dignity, autonomy, belonging, recognition, security, and meaningful participation. Health is shaped not only inside hospitals, but inside workplaces, families, schools, neighborhoods, and social systems. A healthy society is not simply one with more money. It is one where people feel valued, connected, respected, and capable of controlling their own lives. By combining sociology, psychology, biology, economics, and public health, Status Syndrome ultimately presents inequality not merely as an economic issue, but as a deeply human issue affecting dignity, freedom, mental well-being, physical health, and even lifespan itself. The book leaves readers with a powerful message. To improve health, societies must improve human relationships, reduce inequality, strengthen communities, and give ordinary people greater dignity and autonomy. Only then can human beings truly reach their full potential. The original narration also repeatedly emphasizes several subtle but important ideas that reinforce the central argument. The discussion about Oscar-winning actors highlights how recognition, prestige, and public admiration may affect psychological confidence and long-term health, even among equally wealthy people. The baboon hierarchy experiments are used to show that lower social rank creates measurable biological stress, even in animals, proving that status-related stress is not simply imagination or personal weakness. The Japan versus America comparison is repeatedly revisited to stress that social cohesion, trust, worker dignity, and collective responsibility can protect health more effectively than wealth alone. The book also repeatedly returns to the moral argument that unequal health outcomes are not natural accidents but consequences of social systems. Because societies create these inequalities, societies also have the power and responsibility to reduce them. That's all for today. We'll meet again in a new episode with another new book.